All right, welcome back to another episode of Just Stories with BT. This is a very exciting episode because we are not in season 1 or season 2 anymore. We are moving on. We are progressing to season 3, which is going to focus all on getting to know amazing authors, not just for the books that they put out, but also for the people who they are. And so with that being said, I'm very excited to announce this week's guest, which is Mark Metry, the author of Screw Being Shy. And if you follow me on LinkedIn, that means you're on LinkedIn. And so you probably know Mark because he knows like everybody on LinkedIn. So welcome to the show.
Right. Thanks for having me, man. I appreciate what you do. And thank you for giving me the space to be here.
No, I love it. I can't wait to get into this book, And so if there are those people who do not know Mark, I am going to give them your 30-second life story. And then afterwards, you tell me fill in the gaps for me. Okay. Just on the big stuff. Okay. So just so that way they have an idea of who is this kid. All right. So here we go. Mark Metry in 30 seconds. All right. He was born in Boston. He grew up in a small town in Massachusetts. As a kid, he was really into drawing, reading, and then he really got into video games, which I'll talk about in a minute. His first job was bussing tables and doing dishes at a pizza place. But he used that video game knowledge and computer knowledge to launch an online business, which actually produced 6 figures at 16 years old. We're coming back to that. But as he grew up, Mark was also developing something that's called social anxiety and fought with a lot of depression and different things. And that had a huge impact on his life, especially when he went to college and realized that, wow, I have this thing called social anxiety and how do I overcome it? And so he spent years trying to figure out how to overcome it as he had a marketing company and different things. But he realized he needed to make some life changes. So he devoted his life to figuring that out. And as he figured it out, he was launched in 2017 a podcast called Humans 2.0, which you can look at the list of guests. It's pretty phenomenal. It became a giant worldwide podcast. And that parlayed him into figuring out how to kind of tackle social anxiety and launching a book on it called Screw Being Shy, which is now a total bestseller. It's pretty amazing. That parlayed him into becoming a TEDX speaker, which is really exciting, which I watched, and we're going to talk about that. And then realizing that the book was helping people, parlayed that into actually launching a coaching program now on helping people deal with social anxiety. The numbers and the percentages on people who deal with it is crazy. And so if you're listening to this, probably 1 out of 4 chances are you suffer from this and struggle with it. And so we're going to talk about ways to help you there. And here you are. Now you're on Just Stories BT podcast.
Woo! Damn, man. That's an amazing intro. When I go on podcasts, they usually mess something up or they're get something. Dude, you did it perfectly, man. I appreciate it. That's a killer intro. You spend a lot of effort, man. I see that. Thank you.
So tell me, I watched your TEDx, and one of the things you mentioned in there, which, you didn't tell me when you sent me the thing, but was that you moved out of your town at a pretty young age. And you were, I think from what you said, the only minority in your entire town. What was that like? Because you said your family's Egyptian. Is that what I got?
Yeah, Egyptian. Yeah, it's so crazy because it honestly, when I think back to it, it seems like a different lifetime. It seems like a different person. When my parents first came to America, we lived in the inner city. We moved around a lot. We were always poor, but there were a lot of other poor people around us and all different kinds of minorities. And yeah, I mean, for me, when I look at my life as sort of a line in the sand, it was when I was around entering 3rd grade. And yeah, I moved into a small town. And then also this is at the time of post 9/11 in America. And so if you were Arab or Middle Eastern or any of those things, that's where you got the boot of discrimination. And so I just remember being a kid and just being wow, nobody looks like me. And then all of a sudden, people telling me all these things for the first time. And really the best way I could describe it is just it felt like someone just took my brain and just put me on autopilot. All of a sudden I just became just always would look down, was always by myself, never had any friends, could never speak up. And yeah, it was very brutal. And it was like that for almost 10, 11, 12 years. And wow. So it was very, very brutal. And then on top of that, the place where I lived was pretty affluent, but me and my family, we weren't. And so it was very interesting because, even though I'm Egyptian, I didn't really feel Egyptian, was always a minority, based on wealth as well. And so It's very terrible. And like the worst part about it is I had no idea. Like I literally had no idea
Yeah,
like why this was happening to me. And I didn't really figure it out until I was like 18, 19. I was like, oh wow, I didn't even know. It's crazy.
that is wild. And obviously, like normally I would ask like, well, did that shape your life? But obviously it did in a major way, you know. And I think, you know, how long and what was the point when you realized that wiring was really impacting you?
I think I first realized it so in 2015, I'm like 18, I'm in college, and I really enter like a very dark, dark period in my life. Like I would say it was like my rock bottom, where all of a sudden, like my lifelong social anxiety that I always had turned into like social isolation. Like I was living with some roommates at the time, didn't talk to them. I stopped talking to my family, kind of developed serious like depression for the first time in my life. Started like abusing myself with food, substances, alcohol. Next
Mhm.
thing I knew, I became like overweight. I was obese. And then I was couldn't go to sleep at night, had insomnia. And then eventually that led me to just like being suicidal for like a month. And the way I was suicidal was uh, the place where I was living at the time in Boston. It was a pretty good area, but there was like a neighboring city that, let's just say, it wasn't so nice. And I remember like getting like campus alerts, text messages on my phone all the time of like, oh, don't go down this street. There's been like some mugging, there's been some shooting, all that kind of stuff. And so I basically just started to go for walks in the middle of the night at like 1 a.m., 2 a.m., just like fantasizing about someone like killing me, just so like the pain could end. And I remember on one of those nights walking, and I remember on one of these nights, like I was walking across a bridge that was like above like an interstate highway. And
Uh-huh.
so like normally there would be like an 8 lane, highway, all kinds of cars buzzing by. But I remember just walking and then all of a sudden, just like hearing silence, like hearing nothing. And it was a kind of silence where it was almost like if someone had a remote control, they like hit the mute button on life. It was like a very eerie sense of
Yeah.
silence. And I remember at that time, like looking up because I was just walking down. I remember looking up and just kind of like realizing, like, wow, there's nobody in the street, there's no cars, there's no noise whatsoever. And I remember at that moment, in that moment of silence, where it kind of felt like I became aware of my thoughts that were happening in my mind for the first time. And I don't exactly like remember, but I remember my thoughts were basically around the lines of like, you suck, like you're a loser, you can add no value to the world, you're a bad person, all these different thoughts. And I remember like thinking like wait, like who's saying this, like even though I had a very low self-esteem, even though I had very
Mhm.
low confidence, I never consciously thought of myself in that way. And so when I reached that moment of silence, like when I was literally trying to kill myself, all of a sudden I was like, wait, like where are these thoughts coming from? And then
Yeah.
all of a sudden I was like, okay, the last time I heard those things was when I was facing bullying, discrimination, because of where I grew up. And so all of a
Yeah.
sudden I was like, oh crap. And sort of I started to connect the dots. And I remember just like running home like that night. And like that moment, it almost sort of like it like broke the trance that like I was in. And I
Yeah.
remember like running home, going to my dorm room and like looking at myself in the mirror and like just realizing like what the hell I was even doing. And I was like, wait, what am I doing here? And like that was the first moment of like awareness and reflection. And then it also started to teach me like, oh, maybe your past has something to do with where you are now, especially if you don't understand your past or you don't
Mhm.
remember it. And I found that's like a very common thing of like people who have faced a lot of like anxiety and depression growing up, a lot of the times like they don't even remember their childhood, they don't remember their past. I certainly did, and I had to do a lot of work. And it's
Yeah.
because like part of your brain tries to forget those things, it tries to like throw them in like the deep dark like corners of your mind
Yeah.
so that you can never think about them, but in reality that actually hurts you long term. And so that was the first moment. It was literally when I was about to kill myself in 2015.
Jeez, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know, it's very common though, for people to, I had on actually my second guest I ever had on the podcast, my really good close friend Mark. Here he is, he's a CEO, he's like the most popular guy I know. He knows everyone, and he gets on the show, and I wasn't ready for it, and he tells me the story about how he had gone through these years of depression and no one knew. Um, And but his breaking point was very similar to yours, which was
Mm.
he had a full meltdown. He had a panic attack when he was at showing somebody like trying to do like a big sales pitch, and he was out of town, and he told his wife, and he came home and he opened up to her about being depressed and all these things. And she said, well, have you thought about killing yourself? And his response really like got me, because he said, and what he told her was, he said, you know what? I haven't necessarily thought about killing myself, but I sure haven't not thought about it. Like just kind of like that thing of like, if something happened to me, well, at least I wouldn't be going through this anymore. Like I wouldn't have that pain. I wouldn't have to deal with all this stuff. So I wouldn't mind it. He just was, but I think that was his wake-up call of like, whoa, and she'd said like, hey, I think normal people like don't not think about, it would be like, no, I don't want to die, and that was the wake-up call. And like, then it had to be therapy and all that kind of stuff, and I resonate because I struggle with anxiety my whole life, overthinking everything to like the millionth degree. But I can remember decades ago having a real low time in my life and being out surfing, and someone mentioned to me about, oh, are you scared of sharks? And I can remember that same feeling of like, not really. Cause like,
Oh my God.
What if I did get
Terrified
eaten?
of
Like, the sad part of it was I'd be like, well, I wouldn't be dealing with all this stuff I'm dealing with, you know what I mean? Which is sad, but I wasn't dealing with it, and so I just was kind of hiding that out, like you said. So, so before we get into the book and where you're at now, just to tie a bow on your kind of upbringing. So you have all that stuff going on, but also, you would launch this online business that generated all this money. So how was that? Like, what even was it?
Yeah. So, one of the biggest things that I've learned about like people who have social anxiety, as someone who does, um, a lot of the times, like people who don't experience it, they look at people with social anxiety and they're like, oh, like you're antisocial, or like you're introverted. You don't want to talk to people. And of course there's different times, but like, that's not true. People with social anxiety, they actually like literally are obsessed with trying to be social and trying to connect with people, but their brain, their nervous system doesn't let them. And so for me, like I had that need. And so this, at the time I was growing up, this is also when like social media, YouTube, like the online world was like really starting to like develop. Wasn't really mainstream yet, but it was starting to become that. And so I remember just like doing all kinds of things, man. Like I remember like learning how to make websites. I remember I started to learn how to make iPhone apps. I started to play a lot of video games. I started like a YouTube channel on video games where I would like commentate over it back in like 2009, 10, 11.
Oh, wow.
And then like I honestly started so many online businesses and websites that I've honestly lost count. Mostly all of them failed, but I had like a couple that started to like generate me a lot of money. And like what I started to realize throughout that experience was that like, by the time I was 16, like I like made enough money where like I changed my entire family and myself's life. And the bad part about that though was like, there's like this whole vision of like the American dream of like, hustle, hustle, hustle. And then once you make enough money, then you can like buy all the things you want and take care of your family. And then life is happy. And of course, like money is definitely very important for sure. But I remember being 16, 17, and then being like even more confused, being even more anxious, and like, wait, I already did what society told me to do to be happy, but like literally nothing has changed. Like literally, I still think of myself as the same old loser. I don't feel any different. And so I didn't know how to work on myself. I didn't know any of these things. I didn't know what mental health was at that time. And so for me, I definitely think that was like part of what led me to being depressed and suicidal, because I just got hopeless. I was like, oh, wait, I already did what society told me to do. There's nothing there. There is nothing left for me to do to fix my situation. So I guess this is just life and it's just meaningless and pointless. And I became nihilistic and like, what's the point of life and all this stuff, which then leads you to like being suicidal and depressed. And then your brain like malfunctioning on you. And so it was definitely a good thing. Like it definitely taught like me and all online stuff. It definitely taught me like all the skills that I'm able to use now.
Yeah.
And the money was great. But it was definitely very, very interesting. And a lot of people like when they would know about that, like you don't really make the connection of like, oh, how can you make six figures doing something that you love, but then also be like depressed, anxious, have low self-confidence, have low energy, and still have all the same problems that you still had, and so
Yeah.
it's definitely very confusing.
No, for sure. I had one of my best friends, unfortunately, he committed suicide years ago,
Oh man,
and
sorry to hear
people,
that.
yeah, I mean, it's he was bipolar, which, unfortunately a lot of people are, but the reason I'm bringing up the story is because he did it when he had just had a baby. Like his wife had
Oh
just
my
had a baby girl. She
God.
was like 5 years old. And I think from the outside looking in, I remember because I'd had conversations with him. He had tried before. It wasn't like a shock to anybody. And he's this brilliant guy, but obviously with bipolar, it's like these waves. But what happened is, what I truly believe happened is, I think he put all this eggs from his ability to be happy in this basket of like, well, once I have this kid, I'm gonna be fine. And I think when he had the kid, he realized like, I'm not fine. And I think that's what the just the end thing was like. I can't get out of this hole I'm in. And and I think people do that because I think it's like, if I just make this much, if I just get this spouse, if I had the kid, if I, yeah, and at the end of the day, if you don't internally do that work, none of that will matter.
Oh my God, man. I'm so sorry to hear that. That's so sad. And like I believe it's the numbers like 850,000 people every single year commit suicide. And that's the thing that I've learned, man. Like whether again, I don't know about bipolar or anxiety, like these are like mental health issues that are happening at like a biochemical level in your brain and your nervous system. And like the reality is like anxiety doesn't care who loves you. Anxiety doesn't care how much money you have. Anxiety doesn't care how much people in your community respect you or love you. And of course, all these things are important. But like you said, if you don't do the work on the inside in multiple different layers, then like you're going to be in the same cycle. And the thing is, like, it's very easy to forget. Like it's very easy to like forget and then put all your happiness on like, oh, once I do this, once I do that, even if it's not true. And I myself too, like I find myself in the same cycle of like, oh, once I start this business or once I make this book or once I do that, then I just always have to go back to like, no, Mark, like this is between you and yourself. And like this literally has nothing to do with anybody, it has nothing to do with anything in the outside world to a certain degree. And it's just really important to know that because I don't know about you, but I was never taught that, and so it's like a fundamentally a different skill set to be successful and to be happy and mentally healthy in your mind than it is to be successful and like, love other people and so on and so forth. And so they're just two different skill sets. And the reality is we just live in a world that was never taught to us, and so if you have all these people that are kids and have these underlying issues, then they grow up and unfortunately, like it's a very sad, state, but I definitely think there's hope for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the good news is that at least it's becoming so much more, accepted by society to talk about mental health and, be, very empathetic and like, so that's, at least we're in a much different place we were 3 years ago, 5 years, 10 years for sure,
Yeah.
and we can have these conversations, because I think even like, doing your Humans 2.0 podcast and being on a million podcasts, and I've done a bunch now, and like, I'm always amazed at how willing people are to share and talk about what they struggle with. I just think that is all positive. But on the flip side, and I'm sure you hear this all the time, like after publishing your book, I've got a teenager, and I just look at the pressure that they get from the stupid phone alone. It's incredible. I mean, I didn't have to deal with it. I grew up in the 80s. There was in the 90s, there was no phones, there was nothing. You left your house, you were gone. Like you're fine. You had someone say something mean to you, they had to do it at your face. And now it's just totally different. And I feel like there's these new pressures that kids are under to be perfect and have these worlds that are just not real is very difficult. So I imagine that makes probably people even more socially anxious because they think everyone else has it figured out or they have these perfect lives when almost nobody does. Everyone's struggling.
Yeah, for sure. And like, based on the research that I've seen, I could be wrong, but generally speaking, when it comes to like people's phones, like the people who actually struggle with social media the most, it's actually girls. Girls struggle with this a lot more because like their brains are much more socially adept and like the way that they think about the world. Whereas guys, they, especially younger guys, they actually struggle more with like video game addiction and pornography. Those two are like the big ones for guys. And like all of those have very, very detrimental effects. And then more important, like what I would say is this, like, yeah, of course, like if you're growing up, there are things going to be influencing you. But here's the thing though, like your phone, the video games, whatever, that's not the cause of anxiety. That is what they're using to treat it. And so they face anxiety, then they sort of like use their phone to like deal with it and cope with it, when in reality, it actually makes them worse unless they know how to use their phone in the right way. And so it's sort of like this self-depreciating cycle that just takes people further down and down on multiple different levels and multiple different fronts. And so it's definitely a very interesting conversation to have because, dude, we're definitely not prepared. Like kids, like, honestly, that's like why I feel like I have such a big responsibility, because like I feel like I'm at the intersection between really young people and then also like adults, where I can be in the middle and like I know what it's like to grow up as a kid, but then I'm also like I'm not like in my 30s to be able to like be so detached from that mindset to be able to like relate to them, you know? And so I feel like I personally like have a responsibility to just try to share, because I never learned these things, you know? And so it's crazy, man. It's crazy for sure.
No, that is wild. And so tell us, take us back and tell us a story around, how did you even get the idea to launch Screw Being Shy,
Yeah.
And someone who's suffering from that and trying to figure it out and come through it, and then to go out and like do a book and talk about it all. I mean, I can imagine that had its own challenges, but what was the kind of tipping point behind it? And then follow that up with give us a 10,000 foot view of Screw Being Shy and kind of what it's really about.
Yeah. So honestly, to be honest with you, I really didn't want to be an author. I didn't set out to write a book. Like, dude, I literally got C's and D's in all my English writing classes in school. I honestly think I write like a third grader. That's why I thank God for my editor and like all these different editing apps. They help me out a lot. So for me, how it kind of started was I got invited to do my first public talk at the end of 2018. And like in 2015, I had my rock bottom. 2016, like literally every single day, like focusing on how can I get out of social anxiety. End of 2018, I got invited to do my first talk. It was definitely quite nerve-wracking, but because I had been tackling my social anxiety like every single day in my real life, when I became a speaker, it was actually amazing. I like literally had so much fun. It's like one of my favorite activities still now. And really what happened was in 2019, I like basically went on a speaking tour all around America. And I basically was able to speak at like every major city in the US for the most part. And I was invited by like different conferences and events and stuff like that. Some of them were like marketing, business. The other ones were kind of like mindset, leadership, things like that. Yeah. And, whenever I go to these events, I talk about my story. And like literally every single time, every city, every event, every time I spoke, and then people like after I'd be done talking, people would like line up or like people would try to ask you questions later on. There would always be at least one person who was like, they would walk up to me. Maybe they would be looking down. Maybe they would stutter. Maybe I could see them blush or like maybe their hands were shaking. Yeah. And they would tell me, they were like, hey, Mark, how did you go from having like social anxiety, debilitating your life, to be able to like speak on a stage in front of hundreds of people about like your life story? And like that just kept on happening to me again and again and again and again and again. And what I've learned is like through doing my podcast, through doing over like 600, 700 episodes, I don't want to waste people's time. I don't want to give people advice that's just going to have them like, running around in a circle. And so for me, I was like, if I actually want to address this, I need to create like a step-by-step, sort of instruction or some sort of a, guide to teach people like, hey, this is the root cause. And then these are the different layers that you need to work at step by step. And so I was like, I have to write this book. And I remember I was in like LA, and I remember I was trying to sleep at night. And for me, like I always had sleeping problems throughout my entire life. It's always been a huge struggle. But now I don't really face them because I've learned how to sleep. But this night I just couldn't go to sleep. And I remember I try to close my eyes, and then in my head, there was just like screw being shy, screw being shy, screw being shy, which is the title of my book. And so I remember the next day waking up and just like pulling out like the notes app on my phone and just like writing like, all right, this is what I'm going to do. And then on the flight back, just like writing and all this stuff. And so, yeah, that's why I wrote the book. Like, I just realized that I have to do this. And like, I looked around and I've read other books on social anxiety, but to be honest with you, like most of them, there are definitely some good ones, but most of them kind of suck or they're too advanced. And I'm just like some guy in my 20s. And so I knew I could speak at like a common sense level to people. And then plus like through my podcast, getting in touch with like doctors, neuroscientists, all kinds of people to be able to like take that knowledge and then put it in like a digestible form where people can get it and go step by step. And so, yeah, that's how I did it. And then in terms of like the book and whatnot, the 10,000 foot view, really what it's about is a lot of the times people who are shy or people who are introvert, a lot of the times, like being shy is a totally natural human emotion. Like being shy is sort of a way that we test people. Like, for example, like my niece, she's about to turn 2. I will like notice she'll be like a tiny bit shy the second she meets someone. And like all that is just like a survival mechanism.
Yeah.
The issue is when you become shy, like all of the time, whether it's people you've known before, whether it's people you've talked to before, places you've been before, you're shy all the time. And then when it comes to being an introvert at a psychology level basically means that your brain, like the way that it's naturally designed, is it has a tendency to just automatically focus inward, to be more introspective. And so that's what all being an introvert means. But we live in a world where if you're shy or if you're an introvert, if you're quiet, that could actually be social anxiety. And so it's sort of like disguised and camouflaged as being a good little introvert or just being, shy, which people don't really see as a serious problem. And it's really interesting. Like in my TEDx talk, I talk about this. Harvard University, they did a meta-analysis study. And basically what they found was that out of all the various mental health issues in America, social anxiety is the most correlated with substance abuse, social isolation, and suicide. And so I was looking back at my story and I was like, substance abuse, check, social isolation, check, suicide, check. And so a lot of the times what happens is people, they sort of have like a traumatic event or they have a big shift in their lives, sort of unknowingly at times when they're a kid. And basically like what happens is like part of their brain breaks. So like the same way that like if you get hit by a car or something and your leg breaks, right? Our society has an entire system of dealing with that. They're like, hey, go to the doctor. Then we're going to put you in a cast. We're going to give you crutches. Then if you come back next month, we'll change out the cast. We'll put you in a different cast. And then the third month, we'll take you through physical therapy and we'll teach you how to reuse your leg again. The same exact thing is true with mental health and social anxiety. And so a lot of times with social anxiety, it comes from like something like me, where like you're in an environment where people are discriminating around you. It can come from like your parents getting divorced, bullying, physical, sexual, emotional abuse, being kicked out of your friend group. Like there's all these different things that can trigger like this break in somebody's brain. But the thing is that nobody knows. And so what happens is you're a kid, you're a teenager, and then you're just like trying to figure it out every day. And like you sort of learn like what you got to do every day to survive. And a lot of the times it's not really like healthy coping mechanisms. It's usually unhealthy coping mechanisms, whether it's eating too much processed food or alcohol or drugs, or whatever it is. And so all these things, they strain your brain more and more and more and more and more and more. Basically, the next thing you know, you're 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, when your brain is waking up out of the, what I call the childhood neurotransmitter dump of like when you're a kid, even though you're experiencing terrible things, even if you are experiencing terrible things, your brain is actually designed to just like pump you with like so many neurotransmitters neurotransmitters like dopamine, serotonin that make you okay with dealing with life. But then what happens is by the time usually around 20, 25, there's just a natural decrease in your brain's ability to produce neurotransmitters. And so all of a sudden you're going through that, you have these unresolved issues, and then something happens.
Yeah.
Something happens with your parents, you get into a car accident, you have a financial issue, it's another stress. The next thing you know, your brain literally breaks. Substance abuse, social isolation, suicide. And so I kind of like wrote this book to like take people through like, this is what the problem is. It's actually a much more serious problem than we think it is. And like your kid who is just like shy or introverted, yeah, they could be shy, they could be introverted. There's nothing wrong with that, but they also could have social anxiety. And if that's not dealt with, that sets them up for a lifelong of struggles. And so like basically in the book, I take people through like the root cause. I take them through like understanding more about like the brain, how it operates at like a basic level. And then I start talking about what people can do to start to like shift their literal biochemistry and to start to heal and like rebuild their brain. And then there's all these different parts of social anxiety. There's all these different layers to it. And so I just go through every single layer and just like teach people like, hey, here's what you need to know based on the science, based on the data, based on my personal story, based on what other people have done and that has worked for them. And so, yeah, man, it's awesome. You know, I'm super grateful to be able to do it.
Yeah.
And I definitely hope to write another book kind of about the similar stuff, but even more in detail. So
Nice.
if that makes sense. Yeah.
No, it's amazing. And tell us, you know, give us a look into, you know, what was the hardest part? You know, what was your biggest struggle when trying to write a book? Especially like for anyone who's not watching the video, Mark's not 50 or 60. Mark's like in his 20s, right? So I can imagine there was probably parts of you going like, God, is anyone going to take this serious? You know, or is the people going to respect it? You know, I can only imagine, right? So what was the hardest part that you had to kind of get through?
You know, honestly, like it was just writing it. And like, for me, like I remember when I was telling you that story on how I was coming home from LA and I was writing on the flight, I remember I wrote like 15 pages on that flight. And I remember reading it on like a different flight that I was on to go somewhere, I don't remember. And I remember reading it and being like, yo, what third grader wrote this? like who wrote this? Like, this doesn't make any sense. And so I literally had to like delete the whole thing and like start from scratch again. And so as someone who, again, like I've never been good at writing, I'm still not good at writing. Just literally writing it was the hardest part. And then like at the beginning, it was kind of like easy to write it because like you have that motivation, but then it's like, oh shit, like it's been 6 months and I'm like still stuck on like this one chapter. I don't know what to do. And so, yeah, it was very difficult. I think the best advice that I would give is like, I think a lot of people, when they write, they're like thinking what you just said of like, oh, are people going to take this seriously? Or they think like, oh, does this even make sense? What I've learned is like, all of these are separate skills and they cannot be done at the same time. And so for me, like one of the things, like this is actually why I write. I don't even write because I want to write. I write it to put my brain in the present moment, to remove all distractions and get into a state of flow. And what I've realized is if I can get into that state of flow, I can just like write for 2 hours. And like when I'm writing in that deep level, of course, like I've got to go back later at a different time and edit it and make sure things make sense and like add citations and reference points and all these different things and make sure like it makes sense. But what I would say is like, you have to, when you write, just write. When you edit, just edit. When you are thinking about how people are going to perceive this and you're thinking about marketing it, just thinking about marketing it. You can't do these at the same time. If you do, you will get stuck for sure. And so that'll be my best advice.
No, I love that. You know, that's actually, it's funny because I actually reached out to a friend before I launched this podcast who had done a ton of episodes, you know, like yourself. And I was asking for feedback, you know, and that's actually exactly what kind of the similar feedback, which was, dude, when you're doing a podcast, like do your research, you know, make the connections, whatever. But once you go, just be in it and let it flow. Do your thing. Don't be worried about like, ooh, that was a good clip, or I might use that later, or I could market that. He's like, don't think of any of that. Later, you go back, edit, produce, whatever, you know, he's like, but just in the moment, like be in the moment. Cause you never know where you're going to like strike something that's like, wow, that's really cool. Now I got to veer over here because this was awesome, or whatever it is, you know? And I think, you know, to your point, you know, I mean, at least I know this to be true for me, but I see it in my kids and I see it in people in their 20s and 30s that actually grew up with electronics and phones and social media, because I didn't, you know. And I said one of the biggest differences I see is that I see people who are seeking authenticity, you know, like what is real and what's not real. And I think that's why things like stories, you know, on Instagram and LinkedIn and all that stuff, why did stories get so big? Well, because stories, at least for the most part, are much more transparent. Hey, it's not overly edited. It's not this, like, it's an actual look into like, hey, that actually was the person at the restaurant just on their phone. Cool.
Oh, wow.
I now can kind of relate that that's like actually happened, you know? And I think that's why stories took off so much, you know, because it's more authentic. And I think that when you, to your point, I think when authors write, the really good authors, because you hear that term getting into flow or being in the zone or whatever it is, like that's when the good stuff comes out, because you're not worrying about what is someone going to think about this? What, you know, what do I need to do? How many pages should I write? What's the paragraph? No, it's just like, boom, here's the goods, you know, coming out, that's such good feedback. So I'm so glad you definitely, maybe like the trailer of this episode is going to be that little nugget.
I love that. I never thought about that with stories. That's so interesting. It makes a lot of sense.
So what was it like the first time you got a copy of the book? Hard copy.
Oh, man. You know, it's actually kind of an interesting story. So like the week, I think I got a copy of the book like a month before, or like 2 or 3 weeks before it came out. I don't remember. But I remember I was like doing all these podcasts. Okay. And so basically like I was like literally scheduled to do like 10 podcasts a day. It was crazy. I like don't recommend that amount of volume. I kind of burnt out. But one of the things is like, dude, I literally remember getting a copy of my book and literally being like having like an oh shit moment of like, oh shit, bro, like your experiences, like the things you've been through with like your friends and family, like your honest thoughts, like literally anyone in the world can buy it. And like, again, at that time, like I was like already posting on LinkedIn. I was like trying to talk about my personal story, my podcast, but like all that stuff is digital. And so all of a sudden, like when it was in front of me and I was like, oh, this is where I talk about like where I wet the bed when I was 18 years old. Oh, this is like all these different things. I literally remember being in the middle of a podcast and thinking about that and literally being to the host. I'm like, hey, excuse me, give me a second, and literally running to the bathroom and throwing up. And like, I remember too, this was also the time of like when COVID was just starting to happen. And so nobody knew like what the hell was going on.
Yeah.
And I remember going to like New York City at the time, because I was interviewing a few people like Jay Shetty. I don't know if you've heard of him.
Yeah.
Max Lugavre. And I remember like just kind of feel like my stomach just be queasy of just like thinking like, oh my God, I'm going to put this out there. So it was a great moment for sure. But it was also like, once I go for this, there's no going back. Like once I do this is like, there's a line that I'm crossing here. Like this is going to be the rest of my life forever, you know? And so it was a great moment. I would do it again. But it was definitely very stressful. I wouldn't lie, for sure.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. You know, I think I don't relate to that from a book perspective, but I remember heavily, like this probably like 5 years ago, I decided I was working for this organization and I was trying to get my message out to the masses, right? They had thousands of employees. And I'm like, dude, I want to train them. I want to get them excited about my products, all this stuff. And they all had tablets. They were like this big new thing. Every employee's gonna have a tablet, walking around these stores and all stuff. So I went to the VP of basically IT at the time, and I said, hey man, could I push content to this tablet? And he was like, well, I mean, I think so. And I'm like, how would I do it? And he goes, well, you could create like a SharePoint site. And because it's like a PC tablet, he goes, we could house the SharePoint site on there and you could push content right to it and they could watch videos or whatever. I was like, boom, I'm doing it. So I create this site. And because I'm in the mattress industry, I called it Between the Sheets with BP. Because I was a big like fan of Zach Galifianakis is like Between Two Ferns. So episodes and I'd put literally sheets up, and I'd interview people. But I did over 200 videos in 3 years that I pushed out. And some of the stuff I put out was you know, embarrassing. Some was super transparent. You know, I got really vulnerable. It was fun and all this stuff. But to your point, I remember a couple of times I'd put something out and be like, oh my God, I cannot believe I just sent that out to thousands of people. You know, like but whatever, you know, like I can't unsend it. You know, it's out there now. So
It's a crazy feeling, man.
Oh, I bet. So last thing, as I know time is valuable here. So my last thing would just be, you know, give us the 2-minute overview of your kind of coaching system that you have, you know, because I checked it all out. I went to the website and like kind of read all about it. It's really cool. So give us the 2-minute version and then tell people how they could check it out if they're interested.
Yeah. So if people want to contact me, if they're interested, all this stuff is on my website, which is just my first and last name.com, markmetry.com. And so basically for me, like my coaching, and then I also have like an online course. It costs like $50. And basically what it is it's 9 weeks, it's 45 days. And so literally what happens is every single day, there is like an educational module that like teaches them a concept. And then it teaches them like why they need to do it, how, any misconceptions, and then like an interaction point. And so basically every single day for 45 days, every weekday, they will just get sent like a module. And so basically like the way I designed it is like very practical, very realistic in mind of like not overloading people with information, giving them baby steps. And basically it just takes you week by week of like, here's everything you need to know to like understand social anxiety. Here's everything you need to know to understand your social anxiety, to understand your root cause. And then it walks them through the steps. Like one of the big ones that I talk about is like biochemistry and your neurotransmitters. This one was a big one for me because like the moment that you realize that you like right now, like as an adult, you don't have social anxiety because people are mean to you or because people are judging you or because you're a loser. You have social anxiety because your serotonin neurotransmitter is dysfunctional. It's because your nervous system is running on a 24/7 like algorithmic toxic cycle loop that is past your level of control. And so a big thing that I teach people is like, this is past your thoughts. This is past like your mindset. Like there's very positive people who are very kind, yet still face anxiety and depression. And it's not because they're bad people. It's because like the hardware of their brain isn't working correctly based on their past experiences, how they have their life set up, their different inputs. And so a big part of the course that I talk about is like, hey, here are the different ways that you can like literally physically force yourself to feel different, to force your brain to heal, to force your brain into a higher state of mind so that even if you get there, your entire life has changed. Because like, that's like, for example, when I was talking about my story of suicide, when I had that moment on that bridge of clarity, there's no going back. Like there's no going back in terms of like, once your mind has been stretched, once it's experienced a certain moment, a certain feeling, your mind is always going to remember that. And so that's like a huge, huge part of the course of like, this isn't about reading a book. This isn't about someone motivating you. This is literally about someone telling you, hey, here's X, Y, and Z that you can do in your real life to force your brain, to force your neurotransmitters to fundamentally make you feel a different way. And then once you feel a different way, you get a glimpse of like who you are when you don't have social anxiety. And then once you get that glimpse, there's no going back. You're going to be motivated. You're going to be consistent. Of course, there's going to be ups and downs. And like, you know, as someone who's a young person, like I don't have that big of an attention span. I've worked on it over the years. And so like the course is literally designed to like be as practical, as simple, like no fluff. Here's what you need to do day by day by day by day. And so, yeah, I've literally been working on it for like 2 years. So far, like I have hundreds of people enrolled in it. Like I've gotten great feedback so far. I try my best to make it affordable so that people can get access to it regardless of their like socioeconomic level and their situation or whatever. And so, yeah, I mean, so far I've gotten great feedback. And yeah, then if anyone has any questions or anything around that, please feel free to contact me. I'm happy to answer your questions. related to the course or not. Either way, about anything really on my website, markmetry.com.
It's so awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. I think so for everybody needs to do two things, which is A, check out your website, but also I learned so much just from even from your TEDx talk, you know, so get the book, watch the TEDx talk, because now I want to read the book. So I'm gonna have to order the book ASAP. Because we didn't even get into all the stuff that I really love talk, which was like about the diet and food and like how all these things weave together. So people are gonna have to check it out on their own and make it happen.
Damn it, man. Next time you have me on,
next time, yes, do it again. When you do the second book, we're doing it. Awesome. Well, thanks, Mark. I really appreciate your time, man.
Brett, you're the best, and I appreciate everyone out there for listening. I appreciate it.
Yes. Later.